Good afternoon and welcome to the Biddeford Parsonage Museum. We're here this afternoon to read a short story written by L.M. Montgomery. It's called Lilian's Roses. It was published on July 10th, 1901 in Zion's Herald, and it can be found in more recent publications in a magazine from a few years back called Kindred Spirits. I'm Roger Moore, and I'm going to be narrating this story, and I'm assisted by these three young, lovely ladies this afternoon who are going to introduce themselves. On my far right...
Hi, I'm Emma Coughlin.
And I'm Emma Palmer.
And I'm Katrina Badali.
Lilian's Roses.
Well, Lilian, I never saw a girl so fond of her flowers as you are,
laughed Molly Burgess. She had just met Lilian coming out of Mr. Chamberlain's gate, proudly carrying a cluster of roses which Mrs. Chamberlain had given her. Very lovely roses those were too, great creamy beauties with the faintest sunset blush in their fragrant hearts. Lilian had paused to show them to her friend and express her delight in them.
Yes, I do love them,
answered Lilian as she sniffed daintily at the perfumed cups.
Oh, Molly, I think all flowers are so lovely, but especially roses. Really, I sometimes do envy you a wee bit when I think of your lovely big garden. Wasn't Miss Chamberlain kind to give me these? There are 5, and one dear wee baby bulb. Besides just peeping out, I mean to take them home and put them in the vase on my dressing table. They will keep a long time, and just think of all the pleasure I shall have from them. It will be delightful just to sit and look at them.
Molly laughed again at Lilian's enthusiasm, and the two friends parted, for Lilian had to do an errand uptown for her mother. As she walked along, with her beauty-loving little eyes fixed on the roses, old Mr. Logan came out of a gate just before her and hobbled slowly and painfully along the street. Lilian knew Mr. Logan very well and was sorry for him. He was old and poor and crippled and had very little cheer or comfort in his life. She hastened along until she caught up with him, for she knew he always liked to see her. Somehow, most people did like to see Lilian. She was as bright and pretty and cheerful as her flowers.
What bonny roses you have, lassie,
said Mr. Logan, looking at them with his dim old eyes.
They mind me of some Margaret used to have growing on a bush long ago. White and sweet and bonny they were, to be sure.
Margaret was old Mr. Logan's wife. She had died long ago. The old man did not often mention her name, but when he did, it was in such a tender voice that even little Lilian understood what she had been to him. Lilian hesitated for a moment. Then she detached a rose from its sisters and held it up with a smile.
Wouldn't you like one, Mr. Logan? See what a lovely pink heart it has. There, I'll pin it on your coat for you.
The old man's face beamed with delight. He touched the beautiful blossom almost reverently.
Thank you, lassie. It's as sweet as yourself. Bless you for your kindly thought for an old man.
How pleased he was,
said Lilian to herself as she walked on.
I'm so glad I thought of giving him one.
A few minutes later, Lilian was in a dressmaker's room above a big store, watching the busy workers, while Miss Wilson folded up a parcel of patterns for her mother. Miss Wilson herself looked pale and tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her face had a hopeless expression. She had been up most of the preceding night, waiting on her sick mother. Lilian did not know this, but she thought Miss Wilson seemed very sad.
I wonder if she'd like one of my roses.
She thought, looking a little wistfully at her treasures.
3 would be plenty for me.
When Miss Wilson came to her with a parcel, she held up a rose.
Would you like one, Miss Wilson?
She said shyly. Miss Wilson smiled down into the bright little face.
Thank you, dear.
She said gently.
How sweet it is. I'll take it home to Mother. She has always been used to living in the country and pines, so for her old garden. This will seem like a message to her from it. She has been very ill, but I am sure your lovely rose will cheer her up.
Downstairs, Lilian stopped at the ribbon counter, for Mama Reed had told her she might buy a yard of that lovely shot silk hair ribbon she had wanted so long. As the pale, slender girl behind the counter measured it off, Lilian saw her cast a longing glance at the roses. How tired she looked, and how sad her soft brown eyes were. Lilian laid one of her roses on the counter and smiled up at the girl.
Here's a rose I'd like you to have if you care for it. Aren't roses beautiful, don't you think?
For a moment, Lilian felt frightened, for she thought the girl was going to cry. Tears welled up in the brown eyes as she picked up the rose tenderly and laid it against her cheek. When she spoke, there was such a funny little tremble in her voice.
Oh, thank you. It makes me think of home. I haven't had any roses like this since I left home. There used to be a bush growing by our garden gate that had pink roses just like this, white and sweet with pink hearts. I put some of them in my little sister's hands when she died. Oh, you don't know how much good you've done me. This has been such a hard day, and people have been so hard to please. Thank you so much.
A lady now came up to be waited on, and the pale girl turned to her with a smile that had not been on her face before, while Lilian made her way out.
To think that one flower can mean so much to anyone.
She thought.
Oh, how glad I am that I gave her one.
When she passed the tiny little cottage where the Franklins lived, Lilian saw Mary Franklin sitting by the open window, looking out with a rather fretful expression. Mary had been ill for a long time and was just getting better. She found the time very tedious, for but few of her classmates went to see her. Mary Franklin was not liked. Lilian did not like her either, but she could not help thinking how dreadful it must have been to be ill so long, and how lonely to be sitting there all the time and not to be able to go out at all. With just a little sigh, Lilian parted her 2 roses. Then she opened the gate and ran lightly up the path to the window.
A rose for you, Mary.
She said gaily.
And I'm glad you're getting better now. Don't tell me you ever saw anything prettier than that.
Mary's fretful little face softened into a smile as she took the rose in her thin hand.
Thank you.
She said gratefully.
It is pretty, and I'm ever so much obliged. I'll get Mother to put it in a tumbler right here beside me on the windowsill, where I can watch it and talk to it. It will be real company for me. I love flowers so.
So do I.
Said Lilian warmly.
I think they can just talk to you if you listen right. Now,
She said to herself when she reached the street.
I do believe I'll have to go home with my eyes shut if I want to save my one rose.
When she reached home, Mrs. Murray was in the parlour talking to Mama Reed. Lilian was very sorry for Mrs. Murray. Her little daughter had died a year ago, and it had almost broken her mother's heart. There was no help for it. Her last treasured rose, with its wee white baby bud, must go. It would bring a smile to Mrs. Murray's sad face. Lilian knew, and it did,
You don't need flowers about you. You're a flower yourself, dearie,
said Mrs. Murray as Lilian pinned the rose on her dress. That evening, Molly was in Lilian's room and asked her where her roses were. Lilian told her.
Well, Lilian Reed, if you're not the very queerest girl,
Exclaimed Molly.
Here you were promising yourself no end of pleasure from those roses, and you haven't had a bit.
Oh, but I had.
Said Lilian with a smile.
Ever so much more than if I had brought them home as I intended. You ought to have seen the faces of those people I gave them to. They were better than 100 roses.
Lilian's Roses by Montgomery.